So, good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining this webinar, which is co-hosted by Oliver White and Board Group. Today's session is around integrated business planning, but how to move from just a flat plan into a dynamic planning process, and how to meet challenges that the world throws at us. Including the need to be more agile in business and flexible around our decisions, on the basis that obviously now the most likely outcome, it has more than one scenario, ever more than the past. For today's webinar, if you do have questions, if you can please type them into the chat area. We'll try to answer as many as we possibly can during the session. But any that we can't answer during the session, we'll capture them and we'll come back to everybody with an answer directly to that person that's asked. So if you can just type in the chat bar. We're going to also do some polls. The polls will be interactive and you'll be able to vote on what you think around certain parts of the process. So our agenda for today is about our partnership, just very quickly. I think today more than ever, technology is an absolute, in terms of being able to support dynamic integrated business planning. We're going to actually talk about what that means. We're going to look at some scenarios and some demonstration of how we change leads to opportunity. So how change in the process, we're also going to look at how you set yourselves up for success, and then we'll take some questions. We'll use polls to gather your input to be able to then have a conversation around what that means. So just very quickly about Oliver White, founded in 1969, really as thought leaders and educators of business that really moved from turning theoretical concepts into practical application. And we're recognised as the thought leaders in the space of integrated business planning, having first created S&OP in the 70s.
So good morning, everybody. This is Alan Bagnall from Board. Very pleased to have this opportunity to speak with Oliver White this morning. I head up the FMCG and pharma divisions of our business here, and I'm really pleased to be on this, as several of the brands that you can see at the bottom are ones that I've actually been personally involved with. So if we get the opportunity to share some of these experiences with you, we'll certainly try to do that. Over to you, Gavin.
Yes, good afternoon, good morning, good evening from wherever we're dialing in from. My name is Gavin Allen. I head up the pre-sales team here at Board. And I'm going to be interjecting in the presentation today with some live showcase of some of the principles we'll be talking about inside the Board platform. And as you can see on the slide here, Board is a unified, complete platform, and we're going to be using that very much in the world of an integrated business plan with some examples. So back to you, Les.
So, one of the things that you'll be hearing is around the ability for technology to support integrated business planning. The reason that we have an alliance with Board Group is about the flexibility to be able to model business outcomes. So what we find is many business solutions can only really cope with creating one plan, but to any one plan, there's variation and there's more than one likely outcome. And so in today's world, having a technology platform that allows that flexibility and evolution of integrated business planning to allow the modeling of the future horizon of IBP to be more dynamic, just aids business with decision making. So we're also realizing that working together to ensure customer success is all about integration of people, process in tools. And so what we're actually aiming to achieve with Board is a much more flexible platform where people can design a process and the process can be fully supported by technology. And in today's webinar, we're going to illustrate to you how that approach can be achieved. Today, you'll be hearing from myself, Les Brooks, and also my colleague, Monty Moritz.
Good day, everybody. Monty Moritz here, partner at Oliver White, and thanks for the opportunity. We thought we'd start the day with just defining for everybody on the call this term called dynamic integrated business planning. And now in the middle of your slide, for those of you who are familiar with the process, you'll see the typical integrated business planning model, the integration of information through a series of process and plans that then leads to reviews for portfolio and product demand and supply, integrated into a process where the leadership team as in management business review makes decisions about the future of their business. For those of you who are familiar with this, you'll know that from an Oliver White perspective, we encourage leaders to look far into the future to ensure that this reconciliation process doesn't just serve the immediate crisis, but the impact on their strategic horizon. And you'll know that we advocate that this is an inclusive process. In other words, that it brings all parts of the organization together. This is not new, but what most of you will know is also that this process often sits on top of an organization's normal way of working, and therefore does a lot of manual work and periodic work to prepare and present situations and scenarios in a very static and structured way. Now, as the tool environment has evolved, what's become more and more apparent is that there is this evolution from a world where we are running the business at one level and then preparing the process at the next into a world where we have aligned our tools and process in a way that as change happens, our plans are dynamically updated. Now, dynamic updates is it's a strange term because you can think about it as, yeah, but of course we're always bringing new information to the table. But we want you to think a little bit broader than that and say it's not just about bringing new information to the table, it's making sure that the entire organizational view of its future is continuously updated, that the financial view, the supply view, the demand view, the portfolio view, and the strategic view always reflects the latest reality that we see. And certainly what we've seen over the last year is that the need to be able to do that quickly because change is happening faster than ever. It doesn't mean the structure of the process falls away, but it does mean that the process is served in a much more effective way with change. And if you can think your way around the graphic on the screen, then it means that as a leadership team, ultimately the goal of the process of a modern integrated business planning process is to have clarity about the decisions they need to take to be able to realign their business for the future. They know that dynamically things change all the time. They want to make sure that as those things change, their business is integrating their response, that the response isn't happening in silos, whether that silo is in a functional area like a department or in a functional horizon like we're only dealing with the short term or the crisis. And they also want the comfort that their organization has the ability to present them with options that's optimized. They don't just want to look at one thing, they want to be comfortable that it's going to happen. And then finally, in bringing all of this together, they want to know that what you see on the screen happens efficiently, that their best people aren't spending weeks all the time trying to update information to make good decisions, but that good decisions effectively and efficiently flow to them in the right way. And to do that, they need to have the comfort that the tools that they're investing in to deliver integrated business planning is set up for this success, that it's not trying to integrate different components of the business in other areas that then makes the process unwieldy, but it's targeted at the way they make decisions and what they need to do that. Now, if you reflect on what I've just told you, if we go on to the next slide, what we'd like you to do for those businesses that run integrated business planning today is to think a little bit about how you are doing it today. If you think about the concept of dynamic information in your integrated business planning process, where are you? Is the process still mainly manual with lots of pre-work, preparation, bringing things together? You might have some tools, but what we often see is they're not really fit for purpose. It's scheduling tools that now need to do rough cut capacity planning. It's detailed statistical forecasting that now needs to deliver strategic changes. There's this misalignment that means that we've got to spend a lot of time making adjustments. You might have an organization where the tools are actually designed for the areas like demand and supply to do the right thing, but the integration isn't there. So you've got excellence in functional tools, but then you still need to spend time bringing this together. And from my own personal experience, we see this the most often with the financial integration between planning and the financial forecasting team. Or you might have already developed your tools to a point where you feel most of the time, we all know there's exceptions, but most of the time things come together quickly and effectively to serve your IBP process. So maybe just quickly, while the poll opens on the side, reflect where you are. How does it feel for you today in terms of bringing your tools and your process together in an effective way? Okay, thank you. I can see the reflection already beginning on the webinar. So as we just get the final answers and throw them on the screen, maybe just a few comments from my side, and I'll just ask Alan maybe two things. So really the two things we see are quite common in terms of what we see. In other words, there are organizations that still see integrated business planning as a very manual process with lots of pre-work, and that's certainly relevant. And then the yellow bar there, the limited integration. So once again, we've probably built an understanding of what's needed to make the process run. But what we still need to do is we need to take the technology and then manually interface it with our process and with the components of the process. And hopefully what we'll show today is a little bit of a reflection of how we can, if we just think about this in a different way, we can solve both these problems for you. Alan, I don't know if you want to add anything just before we move on.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think, you know, we can see two large bars here. One has limited integration. This is very much the experience that we find at the you know, in the before scenario as we start talking to people. I think in the other one that really stands out here is, you know, the word manual appears twice. We've also got standalone financial forecasting, and that is almost ubiquitous in my opinion, in my experience. This bridge between operations and finance, it's still not there, and it's interesting because it's where, in my experience, it's one of the biggest wins actually. So it's not a surprising outcome, but certainly one that gives promise for progress.
Thank you for that. What we'll do now is we'll take you through the next 20 minutes or so through a scenario that we've developed today, just to show you a little bit about how the IBP processes we see it today and the right focus on tool design come together to deliver a result. Les, I'll ask you to introduce sort of the principle before we switch over to the demonstration.
So I guess, you know, if you think about business, really the prime purpose of integrated business planning is about alignment to the business strategy top down. And it's a way of deploying the strategy to ensure that we are likely to achieve what we set out to over a period of time. So typically, more and more organizations are being driven by a portfolio strategy. One of the areas where we see gaps in systems is the ability to integrate top-down strategy to reflect the latest bottom-up portfolio plans, and actually to integrate portfolio and product management into the IBP process. So often systems have either no or even a standalone capability at best, which struggles to integrate. Whilst actually, if you think about this, the portfolio strategy is being driven by customers. Customers then, you know, need to be satisfied. So it's important that we gain alignment of that latest portfolio view, and that we're able to dynamically model the outcomes of change. So for instance, you know, if the latest view of the demand going out over the next 3 years, if we map that back to the portfolio segment view, and that segment view says actually this latest demand plan globally does not satisfy the portfolio outcome and margin that we expected, what is it that we would need to do to activate that? Now that could be a range of things. It could be that we need to do more around the marketing of that demand, to do more demand generation. It could be that we decide to pull forward new product introductions, etc. But a lot of the process starts with how are we doing against the strategic plan in our latest bottom-up thinking. Now, even with the portfolio, there is likely to be different scenarios that we need to run that actually then can make information to provide decision making to leadership around the course that we would like to take. Now, if you think about what's likely to change in the world of portfolio, clearly there may be some need to change the strategic direction from time to time, especially when the world has multiple disruptive events. And in that multiple disruptive events, I'm not just talking about the pandemic that we're in, but other things that cause disruption. So obviously in Europe, the Brexit scenario absolutely was inevitable. It was going to cause disruption and change. So then other things that can change are the service we want to give alongside a product. So it could be that we want to develop capability to use a technology platform. I have one customer at the minute where they've embedded technology into an implant that allows them to understand how people are getting back to health, what activity they need to do. Well, of course, that service was never a service that they offered 5 years ago. So understanding changes in capability, understanding the latest plan in terms of whether we're going to launch key new products on time, assumptions that we make around the portfolio and management of change, whether we have the overall resource to achieve the desired outcomes in terms of project management skills, key resources to deliver innovation, etc. And then on top of that, we may have opportunities. So we may have opportunities to bring forward a product launch. We may have opportunities to actually flex the plan in terms of resource to do more. And likewise, we might have vulnerabilities where competitor activity is driving us to rethink what we're doing in terms of the portfolio. And then financial projections. Most organizations want to understand whether the future portfolio will deliver the revenue and margin expectations that will satisfy the shareholders stroke owners of the organization over the future horizon. Now that's complex in terms of managing that in a dynamic way. And what we're going to do is just illustrate how integration can be achieved with technology by showing you a change to one of these inputs that then can be reflected across the business, both from a commercial standpoint, from a supply chain standpoint, but also the financial impact. I'm going to hand you over to Gavin to actually drive you through that scenario in real life.
Okay, so what you can see on the screen is the board platform. And I think the first thing to identify here is board is a solution that sits on a powerful in-memory platform, and the look and feel is completely customizable. And here you can see we've brought in the Oliver White Wheel of Fortune, as I'm naming it here. And first of all, we're going to look at just this scenario of maybe product portfolio management. Now, we've got a very hypothetical example here where we've got our strategic plan and we've got our very high level view of our portfolio of product groups, and we've got watches, stationery, writing and instruments. We're looking at historical data, so again this can be dynamically connected to your underlying environment. And here what we've got is the market information. So very important to understand that when we're doing modeling, particularly on a volume basis, we want to know what our market share is going to be, and board can connect to external data sources to get this information. Now, what we've got across the top here is our strategic baseline. In other words, this was our baseline plan that was set prior to the beginning of 2020. What we have here is a very simple summary, and we can see the outcome of that particular plan. And we also got to the classic sort of financial view of, the waterfall. But what we've now got is what happens within the year and what happens as we go throughout the year, where we might have various different scenarios. As Les has mentioned, we're going to do something with a global pandemic because it's very relevant. But also there's lots of other types of scenarios that we might have, that could influence what's happening. And all of these can be modeled inside the board platform. Now, what we're seeing with the global pandemic here is we're able to immediately assess the impact. So whilst our reference data and our market volumes are the same, we could instantly say, well, if we wanted to reduce our market share, or maybe increase our market share, and do some changes in maybe our average selling price in the portfolio, maybe improve our margin, maybe introduce some more costs at a very, very high level, we can commit that into the board platform. And immediately this calculates the financial impact and presents to us a gap analysis that immediately says that as a result of the global pandemic, we can actually see that our profits are down. And you can see that it's impacted the volumes, and this is all real time. So at the end of the day, if we wanted to say on the watches side of things, let's increase our market share to 30%, and then we commit that, we can see the information updating in near real time, and it gives us an immediate perspective of where we are against the original strategic plan. Now, this is a very, very simple example. But of course, what we can do here is we can commit those to a particular portfolio environment. So what we're now doing is we're modeling that, and we're now archiving that data so that we can see the impact immediately. So what you can see now is I can see, a massive upturn in sales by getting bigger market share and mix. And as I say, from our point of view, this is all real time. Every aspect of the board platform is fully analytical, so you can drill into any object at any time and look at information across the multitude of dimensions that you may have. Predominantly, this will be according to time, products, legal entities and regions, and maybe the different impact factors. And in fact, when we talk about those impact factors, we could very simply say, if we look at, let's say, a climate change, what we've got here is we can ultimately build into our model a complete new environment. So, we can use very much like we would do maybe in our spreadsheet. Let's put our numbers in here, and we're going to create a modeled version instantly on the fly. So what I've done now for climate change is I've replicated my strategic plan. I'm now going to just basically dramatically reduce the market share across all particular items of the business. And what I'm now going to do is I'm going to commit that now to the portfolio, just for that one particular environment. And what you'll see is that we instantly will get a gap analysis around that data set. So ultimately, instantly, we've got a full financial projection. We know what our gap analysis is. We know what the impact on our profit is. But we've still also got the original plan that we had here for the global pandemic. So board is able to give you those multiple views of that data and exactly where you would sit. So for the purposes of just demonstrating that near real-time functionality, we've got, just in summary, the ability to hold a strategic plan, to have near real-time updates of the portfolio, models at a very high level or down into the detail, with particular drivers with immediate gap analysis. And when we return to the demonstration set a little bit later on, we'll be talking about how we can manage that particular gap in terms of not only profit, but this could also be linked to cash and demand and headcount, etc. This has got a very financial focus on, but ultimately that could be way, way beyond that. I'm just going to return to the presentation. Just give me a second while I fire that back up. Just give me a moment.
Thank you. Thanks, Gavin. And while Gavin's just putting up the presentation, what Gavin has demonstrated for us here is the ability to identify a gap. Now, what many of you will be saying to yourself as we Gavin, just move to the next slide, is that that's fine. The technology shouldn't just be there to show us the gap. What is the decision we need to make as a leadership team to close that gap? And that's the key to this, is that if you think about modern integrated business planning, if you think about the way the process works, we don't want to identify the gap for the sake of identification of the gap, or for being able to identify the issue. we want to identify the gap for the purpose of closing the gap. In other words, as things change and as we dynamically change our plans, we want the ability to also recreate the plan with a new solution in mind. So in other words, we're saying, yes, our dynamic update has shown us a gap, but now what could we possibly put in front of our leadership team so that they can approve new plans that would potentially recover the position or recreate the result? Now, as you know, in Oliver White, and as Les has mentioned in the previous slides, we talk about opportunities and vulnerabilities as a key enabler for this. So we feel that most organizations run their business to a structured outcome, but then you could say on the bench or within the knowledge of their business also maintain a series of opportunities, things that they believe they could do if they were given the go-ahead or the investment or it became urgent or important enough that could potentially provide them with upside, and also specific risks. In other words, things that they are potentially aware of at the moment but have chosen not to put into their base plan because they're still trying to understand the true impact, or they still believe they can mitigate this. Now, the movement from a identification of the gap and into a process that leverages opportunities and vulnerabilities to provide a revised plan or a gap closing initiative is core to the IBP process. And for those of you who run it will know that it's often in that reflection that we get to the new outcome, but also the new decision making in terms of where we need to focus. And we would also want to see that reflected in an updated financial view. The trick is then to say, how do I activate these opportunities and vulnerabilities through my planning process so that they're not a manual database outside of the system, but stored inside of my demand planning tool and then activated as needed, so that activation automatically updates my plan. And that's what we're excited about in terms of that capability in the tool set, to be able to say, I understand the changes I want to make, and as I make them, I can see the outcome of the plan. Now, as Gavin puts up the next slide in terms of that demonstration, it's important to recognize that in many businesses, those opportunities are defined in terms of the plan that we have. So we have already created the base plan that our supply team is using, that our finance team is using, and we've linked those opportunities and vulnerabilities in a relative way to that plan, but often stored outside of that plan, either in a separate module or spreadsheet, or in the commentary, and not available to immediately activate. Gavin, handing over to you, if you just want to show us.
Yes, absolutely. So again, here we are back in the board platform. It's often difficult to distinguish presentation slides from board, and that's a representation of how we can deliver content in a very rich style. But we're now moving our focus on to, we've changed our portfolio, but what can we do to recover that situation? And here what we've got is a very simplistic example where we have a list of opportunities and a list of vulnerabilities. And all of this can be, we can say, put a new opportunity in here. Obviously, we'd want to make it an actionable insight into the tool. But what you can see here is where we're putting in some actions and activity, and we are ultimately saying what would the impact on the business be. Now, we've kept this at a fairly high level. We've also put some probabilities of those opportunities. So ultimately, we could apply a particular opportunity, and we could weight the opportunity probability accordingly. And again, these opportunities can be entered dynamically into the system. So we might say this has got a 50K. That's going to bring in another 100K of sales, maybe another 50K of margin, 20K of net margin, 15K of net profit, and that's got a probability of 75%. So what we're doing here is we're capturing that traditional field of opportunities that might be collected outside. Now, what we're able to do now is not only collect the high level of information, but we could also maybe supplement that with additional context and detail. So, for instance, you could attach to the information itself a supporting piece of documentation. So you can see here what I've got on the screen now is like an opportunity assessment, additional documentation that could be put in to support this particular opportunity. And down the bottom, we've got exactly the same thing where we've got vulnerabilities, again, kept fairly high level. And you can see that we've got the ability to change our different environmental impacts that we were talking about earlier. So again, if I went into climate change, I would see the gap that we had from our climate change. And then what we can do is apply different opportunities and vulnerabilities to that to see what we can do to close that gap. So if we go back to our global pandemic, we can see that we had some gaps and we've got some opportunities. And what we can do is we can decide to activate certain opportunities. So let's deactivate that opportunity and activate that one that I had here. And we could apply that and we can instantly see what the impact of that is. So if I save the data, of course, that would help. So let me just commit that. So what we're doing here is, and let's apply another vulnerability to the equation and remove that one as well. So what we could now do is we can now see real time what the impact of these opportunities are by applying the opportunities. And then what we'll do is we'll apply the vulnerabilities. And we're seeing in just a matter of clicks how we've changed our plan. So you can see there's our gap. And what we're doing is we're seeing how to mitigate and what we can do to apply that gap. So this is all captured inside the board platform. It can be done across multiple dimensions of product. It can be done regionally. And of course, it can be done across many years. So just to summarize again, we're capturing here our ability to have opportunities and vulnerabilities captured in both text with attachments, dynamic ability to both activate an opportunity or not, but also just in closing, we can change the probability of a particular opportunity. And again, we can save these as different scenarios into the tool. We can apply those opportunities, and basically we could work in an executive capacity to see in near real time what's the impact of doing certain initiatives, actions, strategic or otherwise. Again, we've kept the standard demo fairly simple, but again, we can apply those opportunities accordingly. So I'm going to hand back to the presentation and we can continue.
Before we move on, we had a question there around how opportunity vulnerability percentage filters the values into scenario planning. So I want to be clear here. So the opportunity needs to have a structure to it. So, you know, because typically an opportunity will either happen or not happen. Hence, you know, when you're looking at opportunities, whether they're product related, demand related, or supply chain related, then what we need to make sure is that if it's a demand related opportunity, that we relate the percentage increase to the activity that's driving the opportunity from a red opportunity where we don't have a plan to make it happen, into actions that give us a plan, into further actions that then say, actually, this opportunity is likely to happen. Now, in terms of the percentage, we can then relate the percentage to a traffic light system, if you like, of, you know, do we only want to include those that are amber or those that are green in the scenario planning? Obviously, you know, if they're red, it would be wrong to include them if we don't have a plan. And the same would apply to vulnerabilities. We either have a plan to defend it, in which case it's going to be amber or green, or if we're not planning to defend it, then it remains red. But in that instance, where we're not planning to defend, then clearly we would take that out of the plan. So hopefully that answers the question, Alexandra. So I now want to move on to one of the things about modeling is it gives us choices to make. And obviously, as Monty described, integrated business planning is all about decision-making process, and to some extent for that to be dynamic. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we want to be doing all of this within the actual management business review. We need to make sure that the modeling of scenarios is done within the process leading into integrated reconciliation that feeds the management business review, so that not only do we have an understanding of the best outcome and then recommendations, but also that we can put to leadership, here are the key decisions supported with the impact of making those decisions, so that you can now decide which way you want to go. So it's important to recognise that the process will still focus on decisions, albeit we can model and remodel outside of the actual review, ready for the management business review. So that's an important key. And obviously the other thing is to understand the dynamic financial outcome of this, that if we make this decision, this would be the financial bridge to close the gap. If we make this decision, it would have this impact. And again, one of the things that we see in so many systems is it's difficult enough to get one financial plan that's off the back of portfolio, demand and supply, let alone run multiple scenarios. And hence, again, why we see this alliance being customer focused in terms of being able to bring together all of this in one place. Now, we need to recognize that change is a constant. I guess, in business, more and more, we're driven by change and we're used to change, but we need to adapt our management process and style to actually allow that to happen and understand the impact. To do that, we absolutely need multiple scenarios, but again, I would say not too many, because we can end up with analysis paralysis if we're not careful. So what are the key scenarios that leadership would want us to look at? That then drives us to multiple options, and we need to select the best ones to put in front of leadership, so that we're not putting a whole raft of these in front of people when we should have selected the best ones in the first place. Speed to develop and speed to agree. So it isn't that when you've got a horizon of 36 months and the decision is around 24 months out, it's about the quality of that decision and the speed to then agree it, because it's supported by good data and information. Often what we see is organisations needing to make a decision, but it takes them 6 months because they just don't have the data. And then obviously the final piece here around decision making is trust the process and manage change. So it's important that we're able to trust the data and the translation into information, and then manage the impact of that change. And this is really about from paralysis of options to the luxury of choice, with time and process to change. So time, if we are managing an extended horizon, is not the enemy, it's actually an advantage. If though we're only managing within a year, then time is more likely to be an enemy, because what we're not looking at is what exists just beyond the year that could actually create the next event for us as a business, instead of actually being managed at a point where we have the luxury of choice. So we're now going to move into a poll. So next slide, please, go. And before we move to that poll, it's important that we recognise that financial integration, at the end of the day, the activities that we conduct at a business level is all about financial integration and the latest view, so that we understand whether the plans we have will achieve budget, business plan, and start to align to strategy. So it's critical that we're able to generate those financial views and those bridging activities that you can see in green. And so we're just going to do the last live demonstration, and then we're going to move into a last poll around that, and then we'll wrap up with some questions and answers.
Yes, thanks, Les. So just finishing off again where we had here in our integrated model. Of course, these opportunities and vulnerabilities could be time dependent as well. So just to ultimately put that in, so you could have those time ranges if you wanted to. But how do we bring all of this together? So with all of your portfolio changes going on, lots of opportunities and vulnerabilities being highlighted, How do we bring that to the attention of senior executives so they have a consistent view and a single place for all of their information? And this is just a very simple example that we've pulled together, where we can constantly refer to our strategic plan. And again, everything within the board platform is fully analytical. So we could drill down into that business plan by any of the dimensional elements that we have within the solution. And we can graphically present everything. But what we've got here is front and center. We can see right now we've got our global pandemic is being selected. We can see the gap analysis in summary. And again, we could look at lots of different scenarios that are happening in real time. But most importantly, what we're doing straight away here is we're seeing there is a gap, but with the action plan we're detailing below, what might that look like? In other words, are those action plans delivering a trend in the right direction in terms of what we can improve? Now, all of these particular data points can also be associated to triggers and alerts. So senior management could be notified through email or text alerts without having to log into the platform in terms of what's happening with various scenarios and what the impact is. We increasingly work in a mobile domain, and being constantly on the road or out of the office doesn't stop that process of review. So we can see here we've got a dynamic list of all of the opportunities and vulnerabilities that we previously selected, and you can see there's that new opportunity. These are the results that it brings, and we've got the entirety of this available to us. So we can see the entirety of base plan, portfolio, what the portfolio plan is, the gaps, the opportunities, etc. And then to conclude here, what we want is we want to get buy-in. So in other words, we want workflow where we can say, okay, we're going to, the exec are going to review or they're going to approve. So at the end of the day, what you've got now is you've got this electronic signature or digital signature of the individual items that you have on the screen. And you have that audit record of the executive personnel approving or giving the go-ahead for these opportunities to take place. Now, our visual homepages can be far more graphical than this, but I just wanted, in the context of our demonstrations with you today, just to show you how we take our previous results in real time and it surfaces up into actionable insights. And of course, you can change at any time these particular items here. So you can see the economic downturn, we only started to do a little bit portfolio management there, but we can go back to the global pandemic and return to our solution here. So I just wanted to end the live demonstrations with that high level view. But as I say, we have a full integrated solution that can take you around the Oliver White Wheel of Fortune. I'll just hand back to the presentation.
Thank you, Gavin. And I think, just reflecting on that final slide that you showed us, from an Oliver White perspective, when we work with businesses on integrated business planning, one of the challenges that we see so often is the complexity of being able to show the change across the organization. In other words, across the supply chain in terms of the supply chain impact, the demand plan in terms of how it impacts certain customers or certain markets, and then ultimately rolling up into a forward financial view that stretches well beyond the immediate year-end horizon into the rolling 24 horizon that we've spoken about. What we've wanted to give you today is a practical demonstration of this concept that we call dynamic integrated business planning, and we've used the portfolio lens to do that. We could do the same for a supply chain lens or a supplier lens, and we could do the same for markets or customers, whatever the case may be. The point we want to make is that the level of information required for executives to make decisions is at a different level than often the day-to-day and week-to-week planning and delivery decisions we make. And the process of IBP is designed in principle to provide them with the information they need. What we now see more and more is the tools have now got the ability to talk to that language and not necessarily talk to a different language that we then have to reconcile through the process into the right way of speaking. So the key of and this is our final message for today is just to remember, and this is so important to us, that everything that we've spoken about today is not a consequence of other processes doing what they're doing. It's a consequence of us as a business understanding that in order to make IBP work well in a dynamic way, we've got to consider the specific design requirements of our IBP process and the way it needs to prepare and present information that finds the right balance between efficiency. We need to get the right decisions in front of leadership in good time, and trust, in terms of that we've considered all the information in our business, and we've allowed our entire organization to provide us with the changes that they see in the marketplace. And there's a trick to that. That's not something that you can just buy off the shelf. There is definitely a design element around this that says, as an organization, yes, I have an understanding of how the tool needs to deliver this, but I've also got an understanding of what these principles around assumptions, around integration, around aggregation, around the correct use of opportunities and vulnerabilities look like, so that when I specify the technology, I can do that in the right way in service of my process. And for those of you who've listened to us before, you will know that at Oliver White, we very strongly believe that the financial integration piece is foundational to this, because all of the efficiency of your process gets undermined if we're not integrating it with a dynamic forward financial view that businesses need and use to run their businesses, because it just then adds that extra layer of preparation and review that often is just that step too late to get the right decisions quickly. It's this one aligned view that we need to design for and deliver in our business. Now, reflecting on everything we've said, and while maybe before I ask for the reflection in the final poll, I'll just hand over to Alan if he wants to add anything to this picture, and then we'll move to the poll.
No, I think you've covered that really well there, Monty. I mean, the balance that has to be struck here is obviously one of speed to be able to create and provide suitable options, but also to be able to have enough depth in the supporting data and the assumptions to really make those decisions credible. And I think a lot of companies have struggled with this position, because the more they go into the depth, the more it adds to the time. So really having the more modern technologies that allow you to have the best of both worlds is absolutely key to success. And as you say, understanding the financial impact of all of these decisions is absolutely crucial. And if that's kept separate from the process, I think you're always making you're making a decision for the right reasons, but only for the right reasons that you have availability to actually assess. Okay, but no, I think this I think you've covered this really nicely.
Thank you so much. So if we move to our final poll, we just want to ask you if what you've listened today is, and Alan, you can move to the next slide, thanks. But if you've listened today and you've heard this, what we're interested in, just from our perspective, is that, as people who are very familiar with the process in your own business, where do you think your business could probably, everything is always good, but what's the one thing that you think is critical to the success of your process if you had to make it more dynamic and more interactive? Do you think your ability to get your strategic feedback dynamically, in other words, that there's a continuous update of key strategic drivers? Is it that currently your efficiency in managing opportunities and vulnerabilities is potentially not as where it needs to be? Do you find that it's the financialization of outcomes that's the key one that's holding you back? Is it the efficiency of response? It's just taking too long to put the right decisions in front of leadership? Or is it the fact that we can do all of the above, but we're doing it in spreadsheets and off the system, because at the end of the day, to get what we want, we've got to manage it out of the process? I know that all 5 of these will resonate to most of you. So maybe if you can just choose one that you think is, if you could solve only one, what would be the one? It'll just give us some insight as well. Okay, great. As we start collating the results, two big ones standing out for most of you: the financialization of outcomes and the tool integration. And once again, I wish I could tell you I'm surprised, but for us, certainly working with many organizations, these are 2 key ones. The principles of the process of IBP are well established now, and many businesses use them in the right way. But it's the effectiveness of getting, I often talk about this, is the effectiveness of getting the right information in front of the leadership at the level of quality that they understand, and with the financial buy-in. It's often the bit that doesn't close the loop. And as you've just picked up here as well, if we could find ways to make that more efficient and effective, and hopefully we've showed you that there are ways to make that happen, then that's a good process for everybody. What I'll do, I'll just hand over to Les and Alan if they want to add anything, and then afterwards we'll just try and answer any questions that might have come up through the
Yeah, thanks, Monty. So I think your feedback to that poll was very good. I guess that often technology tends to be in advance of ideas, and we're used to technology driving outcomes. I think with integrated business planning, or let's just talk about managing a business, technology has struggled for many years to actually get to the point where it enables an integrated business planning approach that allows you to truly manage an integrated business. The other thing that's changed is complexity. Most organizations now have a matrix model to fit a globalized world, which adds complexity to bringing data together. Most systems in their origination were sold as ERP systems, so planning systems, not necessarily business planning systems. So what we are now seeing is an evolution to the next level, where systems like Board can absolutely change information into decision making that helps business to run a business in a truly integrated way. And I think the result from the poll, it would be easy to say that some of those would also have frustrations with them. So I suggest that we move on to the questions, because
Yes.
we are seeing a few.
So maybe Les, as a start, we've got a question here. How would you sell the benefits of IBP integration to your CEO and board and investors? The old age question. So maybe you and Alan can give that a go, especially if it's already an internal and corporate initiative. Yeah.
So I guess let me have a stab at that. I guess the benefits are about delivering the plan, and often the word avoidance comes in here. That often, especially CFOs, don't like the word avoidance, because in their future budgets and business plans, they don't anticipate problems and events that you manage. And hence, a lot of the benefit of integration is the visibility and the quality of your future radar, and its ability to steer you in the right direction and avoid your organization being swamped by events. So you're working with an organization at the minute, they're a multinational, and they're just managing an event called portfolio rationalization. Now, that portfolio didn't just creep up on them, it's been happening for a number of years. If they'd have had better integration and visibility of the impact, and they'd been looking out 3 years, they would not need to be managing an event today called rationalization. And so a lot of the benefits here come from delivering your strategic plan by improving the quality of radar through visibility, and hence the resultant predictability. Now, that predictability may sound boring compared to managing events, but that would be my answer.
No, I think that's a great summary there, Les. I mean, I wouldn't really add too much to that. I mean, I think the contribution I can add is that senior, the C-level buy-in to all of these S&OP and IBP initiatives has to be, it has to go all the way to the top. It has to be really heartfelt. The sponsorship has to be extremely strong to actually make the good intentions of an initiative actually flow through to a completed and better state of affairs. But I think that's more of an amendment to what you've said.
Yeah. So before we close, are there any other questions? Now, obviously, if there is, then please reach out to any of us. You have our details, and we'd be willing to answer any additional questions either via email or a quick virtual call in today's virtual world. But I'd like to thank you for everybody for joining and for the team that's presented. Hopefully you found this webinar of interest and a way of illustrating what can be achieved in the future. And today, I guess the future is today when you look at what's been delivered. Mustn't forget here that this requires leaders to change and not just technology to be up to speed. So this is absolutely still a people, process and technology issue that needs to be driven in that way to get ultimate sponsorship by the leadership team. So I'd like to thank you on behalf of everybody in the room, and look forward to having another opportunity where we can offer another webinar for you to build more understanding. Thank you.